Hello, you're listening to the OMG MotoGP podcast with former Grand Prix rider and British champion Keith Huewen and myself, Amy Reynolds. We are about to take a look back at the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix just one day ago at the Misano World Circuit, Marco Simoncelli. It's just me and Keith today, but we've got plenty to talk about, Keith. And how was your weekend anyway?
Busy, there's no doubt about it. Misano 2. Only 50% of people turned up compared with Misano 1 a couple of weeks ago, so they were well down on crowd. But I think the Dorna would have been really, really happy to have got that in, obviously because the Indian round was pulled out and replaced by Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan was pulled out in the end because of some other reasons. You'll never get to the bottom of the real reasons, of course. But in the end, Misano bailed out Dorna for their contractual extra Grand Prix. Much better Grand Prix, I would have said, than the first one. I got to say, this one, sponsored by Pramac, was a much more interesting Grand Prix all round, with the exception maybe of Moto 3, which was stunning in Misano 1. I think there was a lot of stories that came up as well. I mean, obviously they've got to move everything out of the paddock. A lot of the trucks and stuff were kept in compounds down the road because there was something on last weekend, so they couldn't just stay in situ. So there was quite a lot of work for everybody to do to get out of the paddock and then have to come back again. And there's been a real rejig of parking places and bits and pieces like that have been a bit of a problem for some people to about find their way around in Misano. But all that to one side, half the crowd means it was a little easier from a work perspective because they needed to get out of there in a big hurry to get to Indonesia. The races were all an hour early as well, which might have confused a few people over the weekend if they've got up at a certain time of the day expecting to see their Misano race on at the normal time. It wasn't. It was an hour earlier. Everybody caught their planes and everybody got out of there. There was a worry at one point because the amount of rain they were having there, pretty similar to what we're having here in the UK at the moment, thunderstorms and the like, really. But that all blew through. But a massive change in temperature from ambient and track temperature, which made a massive difference to the way the track rode. I mean, it's the same track every time you go on it, but of course, as everybody knows, it's a different track every time you get on it because of the weather conditions, because of the temperature. It doesn't need to change much nowadays to make a massive difference to setup. Rumours about Yamaha V4s and the development of Yamaha, that's an interesting side story, I think, as far as that's concerned. Rumours about KTM firing Francesco Guidotti, who came across from Pramac, a great team manager. We know how ruthless KTM are. And talk of putting Danny Pedrosa in as team manager as well, which they've denied, KTM. But it came from... I picked it up on GP1, which I'm a bit sceptical sometimes about. GP1. They do pick up some good stories, but sometimes they're a bit ahead of the game. But it came from Manuel Pacino, who is a very good journalist in the paddock, and if he said it, I would tend to believe it. There are certain people around the paddock, Amy, that you and I and others like us rely on for accurate information. Bertie being one of them, obviously an old colleague of yours, Jules Ryder in my case back in the day as well. And there are other people still in the paddock that are Matt Oxley, despite the fact his politics are always stamped across his motorcycle reporting. The fact of the matter is that he is an incredibly good journalist and gets to the story. And Manuel Pacino, I think, is similar. So that KTM, and we know how ruthless KTM are, Amy. I mean, they really are cutthroat when it comes to their staff.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that they've cut someone loose. And I think potentially that just could be the way that they work. When something's not working, they're not ones for hanging on for loyalty, whatnot. It's kind of like, okay, something's not working. We've got to make a change. And to you and I, Francesco Guidotti, he has such a great reputation as being a really solid team manager. He's definitely the guy you want to have in your box when things aren't going right. But I think potentially they might have expected him to knit everything together a little bit better than what has happened. And I guess the thing that we'll be looking at is maybe not so much Jack Miller, but maybe how Brad Binder isn't quite performing the way that they would have expected him to perform. The bike development has had a little bit of a halt in its progress. And I just think they are that Austrian manufacturer that don't beat around the bush. And if they need to make changes, the thing that I find surprising is putting Danny Pedrosa into that role. He's been amazing as a development rider, as a test rider. But I just don't. And actually, to be fair, I'm saying this now on one hand, but on the other hand, he is actually always in the box. He's always talking to the riders. So when I'm saying, like, where are his team manager skills on paper, maybe that is what they're seeing.
Well, he worked together with Mike Leitner. Mike Leitner went to KTM. Of course, he's, originally Danny worked with him at Honda. And they've lost two of their other guys as well, haven't they? Fabio Stellacini has gone to Honda, I think, for next year. I think that's on the cards. And then the crew chief, Christian Pupilin, is it? I think you pronounce it. I can't remember exactly how you
No,
say it,
I
but
think that's it.
he's off as well. So KTM have got a bit of a restructure going on. Danny Pedrosa, he's an intelligent I say young man, compared to me, he is. He's an intelligent fella. And what he's done as far as a test rider was concerned was pretty remarkable. If we think Misano back 1 year, finished fourth in the race as a wild card. I mean, so the guy can still ride a motorbike. And testing, when you've lost your way a little bit, you need someone who's going to make those. He needs to make 2 steps at KTM now. 1 step isn't enough. That's only keeping up with what everyone else has already done. They've got to make 2 steps. That's a big job for KTM. I mentioned, I think, in a podcast a couple of weeks ago that they're on a massive loss at the moment at Pira Mobility, who are the owners of KTM, Gas, Husqvarna, something like a 1.4 billion euro red line in their books. Again, reportedly, I didn't look up their account, but that's the reported amount that their shortfall in 2024. So you've got a budgetary thing going on as well in the background. So KTM have got a lot on their plate. I think it's the same for everybody. I don't think it's any different for anybody else. And that's why Yamaha is so interesting. I speculated a year ago, would Yamaha stay in the game? Thankfully, and thank whoever is the higher power, that they are. And they're chucking the kitchen sink at it, as I've said before, because they've got an extra team that's got some good riders in it, well managed now at Pramac. They're obviously putting some money into development. There's that rumours of a V4 coming out, which means they're splitting their strategy at the moment, Yamaha, which I think is a great idea come 2027. I mean, what the hell do I know, sat on my sofa here talking about it? But the point being is that splitting their strategy when we get into the 2027 rules, when you go to an 850, you're going to narrow the bike down anyway if you stuck with the inline 4, because it's going to be just a few mil short on, so the lean angles and the parameters that you're working within from a handling motorcycle are going to be different with the smaller capacity bike in 2027 anyway. So the straight line 4 might be a good motorbike, but also the V4, the power that the V4 puts out, if they do develop a V4, it gives them that option. Big deal. I mean, that is a big deal to completely, if they are reconfiguring, if they are producing a V4, they have really decided to chuck some budget at it. So, big up Yamaha. Great stuff. We know that the change of management. Managing director has gone. Lynn Jarvis. He moves away at the end of this year. So quite a lot going on at Yamaha. So and they're looking good. I mean, Quartararo at the weekend. I know he's gone good on the Yamaha around there before, and it does tend to be the kind of bike that works good at Misano. But Quartararo had some bloody good rides this weekend. He looked like the old Quartararo, and Yamaha looked like they were back on it. What do you have, a 5th and a 7th or something? I can't remember, but it was something like that, a sprint race.
I don't know, but I seem to remember he didn't do too badly last week, right? I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's been 2 consistent weekends. Keith, when it comes to changing your engine configuration, do you think that's because they've literally gone, right, that's what they think their limit is?
Well, I think the inline 4 definitely has met its limit as it is at the minute. Yeah, I think that we are where we are with that. Suzuki pulled the plug on their inline 4. Maybe with that, foresight that they could see that this was coming. The V4 definitely works configuration wise, seems to work the rules better at the moment. But the one thing that Yamaha has always been really, really good at is corner speed and the like. If they can make a little bit more horsepower. But when we get to an 850, you're talking different, again, kettle of fish. I mean, I'm no massive engineer, but we are going to see some big changes 2027 wise. A little bit less aero, no ride height adjustments, all those things are going to be, perhaps playing more to and, Honda and Yamaha have got massive concessions, so they can actually develop these things as we go. Whereas, everyone else has not got the kind of concessions that Yamaha and Honda have got to develop new bits and pieces as we go. So, I think Neil Spaulding said when he spoke to us, Honda and Yamaha will be back. These things run in cycles, and the cycle may well turn back towards Yamaha. Particularly, again, if we go to the fact that Ducati have got less bikes on the grid next year, which means less data, which also means less expenditure, you would think. So maybe they're pulling the cost of things back as well. It's the one thing we don't have in common with Formula One is that the huge budgets, and that does make a difference in engineering.
Yeah, definitely. Well, should we turn our attention now to the race this weekend? The Beast is back on top. The race-winning move has prompted some discussion. It'd be so interesting to get your take on it, Keith.
I think Rob McElnay summed it up fairly well when he said if it was in the 1980s, he'd be spending some time in Dr. Costa's Clinica Mobili, getting his face repaired after someone had gone in and punched it. And that's the case. It was a very, very hard move. It took him offline. I was actually surprised. I mean, I don't know whether Freddie's linked into social media or whether he even watches it. Freddie Spencer, I'm talking about, obviously still at one of the stewards. Because the general consensus has changed slightly now. Whereas a little while ago, we became a bit woke. Sorry.
What?
We became a bit woke. Like you were not allowed to do that. You've upset the other man alongside you. You all became a bit snowflakey when it came to the odd pass here and there. And being very old school, that's all part and parcel of it. If you've got to try for the move. What did Ayrton Senna once say? I know it's Formula One, but it's the same thing when it comes
if there's a gap, I can't remember what it is off the top of my head.
It's something along the lines of if you don't go for the gap, then you're not racing. And he kept calling Jackie Stewart all the way through it. I remember it was a Jackie Stewart interview, but anyway, it's quite funny. But the fact is, if you don't try for it, particularly the last lap, for God's sake, it was to win the Grand Prix. Like you were going to expect that move. But I was kind of sat on the edge of my sofa, not because of the move, but because I was expecting any minute that little strap to come up on the bottom of the screen to say that he'd got to give away one place from the stewards. It was a very, very hard move. He stayed online, as in he stayed on the track, on the tarmac, on the black stuff. So the Beast got away with it. But I think it was sketchy. It was right on the very, very edge of... But you know what? Forget about that bit. What I liked the most was the Parc Ferme afterwards. I mean, you've got to say, Jorge Martin is such a changed man. I think he's going to be world champion because of the way his attitude is now. He pulled himself back. He gave that rude, particularly rude in that part of the world, signal when he crossed the line, because he clearly wasn't happy and he was about to explode in rage. Which brings us back to the Rob McElnay point. I wonder if there was going to be a punch-up in the paddock. There would have been back in the day, for sure. There'd have been, even Casey Stoner and Valentino Rossi very nearly came to blows years ago. So you're getting to a point. But he came in there, he'd calmed himself externally. They kissed and made up in Parc Ferme really professionally. I mean, from a sporting point of view, I don't know, what side of the fence are our viewers, our listeners sitting on? Did they want to see a punch-up in Parc Ferme, or were they quite happy to see the kiss and make up part of it? But the point I'm making is that Jorge Martin is now the complete...
Yeah, he's thinking bigger picture, isn't he? He's like, I don't need to start any beef with anyone out on track, especially the guy that's in the box alongside my main championship rival, because if it comes to it on those final race showdowns, you just don't want people making your life hard. If anything was to go awry over the next few races and we have I'm saying, like, it's not worth making enemies.
Let me explain that a little bit, because I know exactly what you're talking about, is that you make an enemy out of Enea Bastianini. The point being is that when that opportunity comes to do exactly the same thing again, he will. Whereas now, he might be thinking to himself, God, he'll watch the video and he'll think, I was hard on Jorge there. I was really hard on him. So he might just think twice about doing it again if that opportunity comes up. And that's where Jorge Martin has been very clever. He's got Enea Bastianini on side effectively. With a, I'm not saying he will give him any quarter because he probably won't. But the point being is, you do think about it. If you go back to the 2015 Valentino Rossi, Jorge Lorenzo, Marc Marquez, Valencia situation, could that pass have been made at the end to give Valentino the points he needed in Valencia? Well, maybe it could have done, but no one had done anybody's any favours. They hadn't got any kind of colleagues on side to either try that a little bit harder or try that not quite so much. And I think that's what Jorge Martin's maturity, and that's what we're talking about here, his maturity into a complete racer has meant that he's kept Enea Bastianini on side. He's not made, as you say, an enemy of him. So therefore, given the same set of circumstances, Enea might just not get involved if the World Championship is at stake. And especially seeing Enea's off somewhere else, why is he going to help the team? It might be that...
and he's not that guy as well. Like Enea was always the guy that, he didn't want to be part of the VR46 crew, even though he was a young up and coming Italian rider. He very much distanced himself from that whole group. And he's also not I feel really bad for saying this, but he's not one of those riders that just because Jorge Martin's kind of let him pass on that one, Enea won't take advantage of that and be like, right, I'm just going to keep on. But he's not like a bullying rider. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's not going to keep doing that to other riders now because he's not got away with it. But Dennis Noyes put a really good tweet up, and it was like a former race director saying pretty much anything should go on the last lap.
Well, I love Dennis, and he's old school as well, and he knows his stuff. But the point is that you can't have anything goes anymore. We're in a situation nowadays where we are very much more safety conscious. We are supposedly a much more professional sport, so therefore you can't have the Romano Fenati grab the front brake scenarios.
Oh my Lord, I forgot about that. That was absolutely horrifying. I forgot about that.
Do you know what? This is, anybody that's not seen the Romano Fenati, he's almost the forgotten man now, was brilliant. He was a brilliant racer.
He was hot-headed.
But he had the worst temper in the entire paddock. He'd throw equipment around in the pit, like da-da-da-da-da. But he'd had enough of this particular racer. And so as he came alongside him, he reached out and grabbed his front brake. Everybody was up in arms and saying he should be done for attempted murder and all the rest of it. And I'm sitting there scratching my head and thinking, we used to do that all the time. That was like normal.
Did you?
Yeah, you just reach across and you'd flick, like if you're in production racing in the early days, you'd reach across and turn their bloody ignition off. Reach over and give them a shove or grab hold of the seat and pull yourself along by it.
I'm a bit of a wallflower then, because I thought it was absolutely despicable. I was like, that is intense.
It was. There's no doubt about it. So I'm desperately trying to think of the bloody guy's name now that he was racing against.
I can't remember who it was.
But he was always causing trouble. He was always in the thick of aggravation. And I think Fenati, being the hothead that he is, it was wrong. I'm not condoning it for a second. But I just remember thinking, well, he shouldn't have done it. But it's not attempted murder and all the other things that were coming up on timelines all over the place at the time. He paid a massive penalty for it. Which he should have got. But at the end of the day, I don't know, things have changed over the years. And so my point is that safety-wise, that's what stewards have to do. You can't have a free-for-all on the last lap. The same as you can't, Holgado lost a podium position because he crossed the track limits on the last lap. Which again, track limits now, when you're dealing in thousandths of a second, make a massive difference. And because track limits now are, tarmac, not grass or gravel, you don't have any penalty apart from the fact that the stewards will award you one. Whereas if you went over track limits back in the day again, which is what we're talking about, you ended up on your arse because you'd got either slippery grass or deep gravel to be dealing with. So I think that we are in a different era. And I don't think we can be seen not to correct every safety issue as much as we can. I mean, bad behaviour should be penalised, which is why, to an extent, I'm still slightly surprised. I'm glad there was no penalty for Bastianini, but I'm slightly surprised that if it had been a year ago, he would have got a penalty. He
Are
would have
you
been.
saying that someone's got a little bit soft?
No, I think someone's got a little bit hard. I think the fact is it's easier to give a penalty because someone's done something they shouldn't have done than it is to not give the penalty. I think that to be tougher and to allow a little bit rougher, tougher racing is harder to do sometimes. You know, you're responsible. You know, Enea Bastianini took 5 points off Jorge Martin. Jorge Martin would be 29 points in the lead now, not 24.
You are making me laugh so much today. It's like you're one step ahead of me. The reason why I'm fluttering down here is because I was trying to remember the new points gap. So you've answered it. It's 24. Okay,
Sorry.
Let's bring ourselves to now Pecco Bagnaio's race. He now finds himself with a bit more of a gap to be chasing down Jorge Martin because he just had a bit of a nightmare race, really.
Well, he did, but he didn't. I mean, the problem was again, Bagnaia, his rate of no scores this year is huge. 7 races.
I didn't even realise it was 7 races. He's not
7
scored.
races. He's not scored.
Wow.
I look. I'm bloody hell. I better check it now. I haven't said that. I actually do some homework sometimes, Amy, which is a bit of a worry, isn't it? Yeah, 7 no scores he's had, whereas Jorge Martin's had 3 no scores during the course of the year.
And how weird is that? Because you would have said always would have said Pecco's the more consistent rider.
Well, I mean,
out of the two.
out of the 2, you're right. In the past, though, Pecco's made mistakes. Now, this week, he didn't have the pace early on, and I don't know. I haven't been able to get to the bottom. It's Monday morning when we're recording this. I haven't been able to get to the bottom of why that pace was not particularly warm early on in the race. Bastianini and Martin got away from it.
Yeah, well, that's the one bit of research that I did actually manage to do because I was trying to figure out what it was. And he said that his tyre basically didn't come in until lap 15.
I was about to say that. It will have been a tyre situation. I mean, the commentators were speculating on it, and it felt to me like it was a tyre situation. And that would have been temperature-wise for some reason or another. But once it started to get into the work, he was riding brilliantly. And the lap times he was doing from, once he started closing them down, he was closing them down by a fair old bit. But of course, you're pushing really hard to that point. He was out on his own. It was his own mistake. But does he make too many of them?
Well, this is the big question now because you have the kind of 2 sides of it because he'd obviously go into his rhythm. He was pushing, and he pushed too much. Should he have settled into his rhythm, accepted the points that he was going to get there rather than chasing the win?
Well,
when you are... Yeah,
they're in unknown territory. I mean, everyone was faster this week because the weather was cooler. Everything was different setup-wise. They'd got all the data from the 2 weeks previous, so they got everything that was rolling on. Track limits were in the sprint race. More than half the field had got track limits warnings by the end of it. Jorge Martin had got a track limits warning in the main Grand Prix on Sunday from very early on. So he was not only just under pressure from Bastianini. He may have had the pace to have put Bastianini under even more pressure. But the problem is when you've got track limits warning bashed up across your dashboard, and he kept having this bloody code that kept coming up, 14, whatever it was that they, it wasn't like the multi 21 or whatever it was, or the number 8 that we've had in MotoGP as well. This was the 14, and Michael Laverty, I think, covered it very, very well on the TNT coverage when he said, could it have been turn 14 that the team had seen that that's where the most ground was being made up. Turn 14 is a very, it's a hairpin. It's an opportunity to make a pass. You've just come through the right-handers of 11, 12, 13, and it's a diminishing, the first one is hugely fast, 160 miles an hour or something at the apex, something like that. And then you've got 12, you're a bit slower, 13, you're a bit slower, 14 is a hairpin, and it's where everybody makes all the ground up if they can and makes a pass. It's quite difficult to pass at Jerez, even though, wherever we were, Misano.
Misano.
even though there were a lot of passes. And so maybe that was a warning for him that's where he needed to brighten his act up. But of course, he was on a track limit warning really early on, and that would have interfered with his concentration.
Especially because of what happened to him in the sprint.
Exactly. Your point is well made. That stuff stuck on your memory, and you can remember exactly what's happened. So, turn 14 was Jorge Martin's nemesis to an extent. So maybe that's what that was about. But MLAV came up with a very good analysis, I felt, on that one. Good on you, Michael.
Talk to me about the early battle for the race lead between Pecco and Jorge Martin. It was quite entertaining. I feel like that kind of set the tone of the race pretty perfectly.
Well, I mean, we've been having some boring races, haven't we, in MotoGP, to be frank. I mean, the one last, Misano won was boring. I mean, the comparison at the moment is not a great one with the other classes. I mean, even Moto2 has brightened right up as well. We had a great Moto2 race this week. So I think, that early battle, I think it's muscle, like Jorge Martin versus Pecco Bagnaia. Pecco's under the most pressure. Jorge Martin wants to steal the number 1 plate and take it with him and take it away from Ducati, who incidentally have now been, they're constructors champions, aren't they, this year already, I think they've won the
this
manufacturers.
Week, I don't know if it actually got. I know that they got their 100th Grand Prix win, and it was with Enea. But the images of Gigi Dall'Igna, and if that win had gone to Pecco, they would have been doing the huge over the top Ducati celebration. Davide Tardozzi would have gone absolutely wild in the pit box, but it was all a little bit more.
Well, that's the point. That is the point I'm getting to. There's much more pressure in the factory Ducati camp. Not just this year, but with the coming year, with Marc Marquez in there as well. Pecco is under pressure every minute of his every day. Whatever he might say that he handles pressure really well and da. Yeah, okay, I hear what you're saying. I say that when I'm under pressure and I'm melting inside. The facade of it all is not always what's really going on. And I think that at the moment Pecco's under a lot of pressure. Losing the world title, which, as I've said earlier on in this, with the new upgrade of Jorge Martin that we're seeing, I think Jorge Martin is going to take this championship this year. He's just looking like the kind of guy that can make it work.
Do you think that's so because he's got less pressure on himself, on his shoulders?
As well. And he's got the motivation of being ignored by Ducati. In the way that he has been in the Bastianini case, when Bastianini got the second factory berth alongside Pecco Bagnaia, he got not ignored, but he got pushed into an independent team. Pramac's a great team, and he's on good bikes, but it's still not the factory team. And now he's off at the end of this year as well. And if he takes a number 1 plate with him, that's like kind of take that. That's one up the backside for Ducati, and excuse my phraseology, but that basically is what would give him a great deal of pleasure. I would imagine.
I've always had Pecco in my head as he always looks quite composed, and even when a race hasn't gone quite to plan, or he's made a mistake, or something's happened, he's always had like a bit of a namaste zen kind of picture by the end of it. I have to say, he looked really pissed, really pissed.
I think his wife takes most of the. I mean, she's delightful when she's got a big smile on her face, but I tell you what, she looks serious when things aren't going very well. And I think that, all of these things that we're picking up on outside the garage, are multiplied within his brain. It's like you can't see or feel what he's really going through. This is everything. This is life. This is the most important thing to him in the world, pretty much next to family, is what he does and what he is trying to achieve. And those little confidence sapping crashes make a massive difference. And like I say, 7 no scores this year. He's basically giving the championship to Jorge Martin as much as Jorge Martin is improving and taking the championship. And I think Pecco's got work to do. I believe in him. He's a brilliant rider. We've talked about it before, but we've got some tough races coming up. It's anybody's at the moment still. 24 points in it, should have been 29. That's not enough to be leading the championship by to ignore any challenge from behind. That is for sure. And I think that Jorge Martin, that part firme attitude of his is what's tipped the balance for me to think that Jorge Martin could be the world champion this year. His attitude, the way he gathered himself up, if you multiply that by 100, that's what it's like on the racetrack when you've got to gather yourself up and not have a rush of blood to the head. I just feel that he's in a very good position now. And Pecco has now got to find that extra, little bit to get back on top.
It's funny how much that has yo-yoed this year.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's after you, sir. You have the world championship. No. Please don't. You have the world championship.
But not even just them. I would say everybody's opinion of it. Like, I would have said in a few, a month or so ago, we would have said, Jorge Martin, he's done amazing. He's a talented rider. Let's keep our fingers crossed and hope it works out for him. But it's not his championship this year. I think it still will be a Pecco done and dusted job. And now we're a couple races later and everyone's like, well, no, Jorge Martin looks like he's the guy this year.
Yeah, and you can talk about that with Marc Marquez and Bastianini. Bastianini's now swapped places with Marc Marquez. Marc Marquez has dropped to 4th place in the championship by a point from Bastianini. He's gone ahead of him, which you would expect from factory riders. That's what they're supposed to do, get ahead. And Marc, again, it's his qualifying that was his problem. Again, he qualified badly. You cannot allow that on a track like that. And we've got Valencia and places like that where you need a qualifying position to make it work, because once you're behind, it's very difficult for making the pass. And again, Marquez just had that little bit of struggle from his starting position, I would suggest.
The other thing I wanted to pick out was Pedro Acosta.
Well, he's KTM's saviour at the moment, isn't he? I know he's on a gas, but it's effectively the same bike. But he's riding for Tech 3, for Hervé Poncharal, Guy Coulon. Their team has always been a great team for bringing on new young riders. They've got that feel about them. Hervé is a fantastic narrator, storyteller, team manager. His daughter works in as the PR side of things, and it's a great team to come through from a pressure point of view. And Acosta, he's a rookie. He's learning his game, but yet he is the best KTM rider. No, I won't say the best. That's not helpful. He's the man that's doing the business at the moment on a KTM badged as a gas motorcycle. Binder should be really somewhere thereabouts. And I wonder whether the difference is not just Acosta's ability, which he undoubtedly has, but I wonder whether it comes back to what you were talking about a moment ago, the pressure within the KTM camp, the Ducati factory camp. When you are in a factory team, it's expected. You have got to do I rode for one factory team, and I remember what it was like. The bike was nowhere near as good as you were expecting it to be, because you're on a factory bike, right? That must be the best thing in the world. But it ain't. It's better, but by only a small amount. So it's not quite the thing you might expect when you get on it. You've still got to work bloody hard to make it work. But the pressure that you get is 10 times more than you would get in an independent team, like, for instance, Tech 3, Guy Coulon, Hervé Poncharal for Acosta.
But Binder and Acosta both crashed on Sunday. Binder was obviously able to rejoin. Acosta, okay, we've been saying all year, this is his rookie year, this is his year to learn. Now we're coming towards the back end of the season, how do we not think that those crashes, mistakes, whatever, should be perhaps petering out somewhat? Or are we seeing maybe the limit of the bike come into play?
I think he's finding his limit of the bike and himself in these circumstances. I mean, he's really young. He's really fast. He's obviously pushing the limit to the limit's limit to be where he is in the race on that motorbike. And so he's going to crash. I'd much rather have a bike racer that crashes than a slow racer that you got to get to go fast. Like he'll tidy himself up in due course. Providing he doesn't injure himself, of course, that's the big risk you have is, but again, kids bounce. It's amazing. I know it's an old adage that people say, but you do. You somehow you get away with stuff you're like made of rubber when you're his age. But he's learning every single thing. He's an intelligent fella. He is definitely a future. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Again, providing he doesn't get hurt. I never, and I'm sure, apart from the cost, I'm sure Hervé won't worry about it too much at all. Crash damage, though, is quite expensive. Hopefully, KTM will be providing every single thing for Hervé's Tech 3 team. But no, getting him to steady down may not be the way to go. He knows what he's got to do. He is learning by the millimeter, by every bit of data, by everything that's going on. He's just sucking up all that knowledge at the moment. When you are on it, when you are absolutely breathing it, it's part of your DNA. You're connected to it. The whole thing is part of you. Your brain is connected to the bike's connected to your brain. There's hardly any thinking goes on, and you are disseminating every single piece of information all of the time. It never stops. You go to sleep, you wake up in the middle of the night thinking about a detail, and that happens like 100 times in a night. So Acosta, the hairs go up on my hands talking about it because, I never achieved anything like Acosta. He's going to achieve. That is a fact. But the point being is I do remember the amount of effort, the amount of brain power, the amount of thinking that goes into racing a motorcycle at a reasonable level. And there is nothing that can distract you from it at all. It doesn't matter. A nuclear bomb could go off in your right ear hole and you wouldn't hear it. It is something that it's a fantastic feeling of synergy with your team, with your kit, with everything that's going on. And I think sometimes we miss that fact. I think sometimes we forget that just how much these guys are dedicated to doing what they're doing. And when you've got someone that's is a real weapon like Acosta, I mean, bow down. It's fantastic to watch the development of a young man like that.
Well, talking about young men, let's now move on to talking about some of the other classes. Let's pick up on Moto 2, because you were talking about how they managed to kind of, what is that you have there?
Paperwork.
Blimey, O'Reilly. I thought you were getting out 2 pages worth of notes there, Keith. I was like, how long are we going to spend talking about Moto 2? Celestino Vietti won the Moto 2 race on the line. Aaron Canet unfortunately finds himself as the bridesmaid once more. And Tony Arbolino. It was such a weird race. There were mistakes coming left. I don't think any of the top 3 didn't have maybe even multiple moments of their own.
Well, Arbolino looked like the man that was going to do the business, but then wasn't. Aaron Canet made a massive, massive mistake in the last couple of corners by, I mean, when you're on a smaller bike, I know a Moto 2 bike's still quite a big 765cc Triumph engine and all the rest of it. It's 175, 80 mile an hour motorbike. But the point being is you need momentum. And he soaked up all his momentum through that last corner, Misano corner, the final, turn 16. And basically just allowed, there's a reasonable run from the last corner to the line. And he just allowed Celestino Vietti to carry momentum through Misano and through Misano corner and pip him he didn't just pip him. He was well in front by the time he got to the line. So Aaron Canet, major faux pas. You won't be doing that again. That is for sure. Talking about muscle memory.
You say that though, but I think that's the problem with Aaron Canet.
Well, you might be right, actually. Yeah.
It took us a blooming long time to find out what that dicky bow was about, and that was because he would never quite finish the job off and win.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't argue with that. I'd love to because I like arguing, but I can't. You're right. I mean, he makes too many of those mistakes, so nothing much you can do about it. But Ayogura now looks like he is definitely going to track house in MotoGP as a Moto 2 world champion. He rode a proper champions race, nice and solid, in 4th place, took the points while everyone else around him failed. Sergio Garcia, messed up massively. He's got a 22-point lead now. It was a 9-point lead coming into this. Garcia's crashed. Jake Dixon ruled himself out as well. The momentum that Jake needed was race wins. He needed minimum podiums, race wins, preferably, if he was going to be in with a chance of this championship at the end of the day. But he's now in 7th place, 58 points behind. That's probably too much for Jake to recover from, given the inconsistency of not just Jake, but Moto2 in general. You can't. Moto2 is take the maximum points you can take when you can take them, or pay the penalty of chucking it up the road. Aldeguer again was he's another a man that everyone's eyes are on for MotoGP next year. I mean, Aldeguer ending up where did he end up? 5th. Joe Roberts, he was another one that he's 3rd in the championship at the moment, but that wasn't the ride that he would have wanted either. So at the end of the day, Iogura, somewhat quietly and unseen, how typical of Iogura.
I was about to say that you couldn't have described him more precisely.
So he's looking good for this title.
And then in Moto3, it was David Alonso, after a 2-race hiatus off the box, finds himself back on top, back on the unicycle. He's so fun.
He is fun. And I mean, like I've said so many times, the Colombian national anthem we'd never ever heard before. Now we are hearing it every other week. Alonso looked good. Angel Puertas, again, brilliant in 2nd place.
Yes.
So the youngster, Daniel Holgado, should have been 3rd, but he had a track limits thing at the end on the last lap. So it took him away. He had to swap places. So Colin Vare ended up taking the podium.
That confused me so much. To everybody at home, I was actually cooking a roast whilst I was watching the Moto3 race. So I was kind of in and out. And then when I quickly grabbed the results, I was like, what? That's not how they came over the line. What happened there?
Well, it's pretty well known that if you have a track limits indiscretion rather, on the final lap, you're going to lose a place. There is a penalty coming your way. So that's, another reason why, if we move back again to the main race, the MotoGP Grand Prix race, that probably Jorge Martin was a little bit more reticent, perhaps, towards the end, because he'd already got a track limits warning coming his way anyway. And if he'd had that indiscretion on the last lap as well, he would have lost the place that Bastianini eventually barged him out of anyhow.
David Alonso tributed his win to his school, which is probably the first time I've heard that in Parc Ferme. That normally goes against the grain, doesn't it? Of like, well, maybe I'm speaking in generations gone by, but schools like pushing motorcycle racing as a future career.
I used to quite like it because my teachers always said I would never amount to anything. You can make your own minds up whether I have or not. I don't care. But the point being is that schools always used to tell you you're never going to amount to anything. You're never going to be able to do anything in your life and all the rest of it. I don't know whether they still do that now. They're probably not allowed now. We live in this slightly snowflakey world where you're not allowed to say these things to kids anymore.
Well, there's all sorts of made up jobs now, aren't there? Just look at my career.
Yeah.
You don't want to say yes. I have a broadcast journalism degree, I'll have you know.
Well, I tell you what, I mean, I always remember when I first joined television that there were so many very, very smart kids. I started in television when I retired from racing bikes, which was 31 years old. I'd done a bit of TV before, and I came crashing in there like you do, stuff the wheel up the inside of everybody. And there was all these really intelligent 18 to 25-year-olds around that had all got broadcast journalist degrees and stuff like that from school through university, and they never got the jobs. And I remember thinking, wonder why that is. Nowadays, they've all got there now. I mean, Gavin Emmett, bloody, what's his mate, the other one that's now doing a bit of television as well. Matt Roberts. Yeah, Matt Roberts is a good example as well. I mean, these guys are career, journos, effectively. The likes of Hodgie, and Hodgie's old school in as much as that he's just come bounding in there from racing bikes and having a good time. JT, Sylvain Gintoli. I mean, we can talk. There's a whole list of riders still. Simon Crafar, who's now moving across next year as a steward, taking over from Freddie Spencer. God help him.
Simon's got probably like the most wild CV I know. Like all the little steps he's made in. I worked with Simon for years at Dorna, so like hearing about all Simon's little kind of stops post bike, even before he was a professional motorcycle racer. Like he's a man of many trades. Is Simon Crafer,
and he's tough.
yeah.
He comes across as the nicest possible man, which he is. But if you want to fight,
Don't
he's
cross
up
him.
for it.
Do not cross him.
No, he's properly aggressive when it's time to go. Light the fuse. Off you go, Simon. So it'll be quite interesting to see where he ends up with the steward's job next year. Certainly, he's not going to be scared to make a decision anyway. But we digress.
We digress. We were talking about the Moto3 race.
Yeah.
But yeah, interesting that he dedicated it to school.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because schools sometimes are a bit negative as to alternative careers, shall we say, for one of it. If you say, "What are you going to be when you leave school?" You're not getting the marks you should be getting. Well, I'm going to be a bike racer. Oh yeah, right. They're a bit, yeah, and schools have this ridiculous, in my view. Like you're not allowed to strive for the wins. It's not about winning. It's about taking part. If anybody says that, I remember the first time that was ever said and my kids came home and said that to me. I said, take no notice of that.
Yeah, I was always told the same thing. Yeah.
We're just breeding people that are roll over at the first opportunity. I call them the working from home brigade. Anyway, there you go.
No,
another rant from Huewen.
It was definitely not brought up like that. It was all about the winning.
Say, it's in the comments.
So the paddock will be very much on their way, potentially even arrived in Indonesia for this weekend's race. This is where the championship really picks up a notch. The races are coming up fast and frenetically. And this is probably where we're going to start to see some fireworks.
As if we haven't seen any anyway.
Yeah.
But it's, I think, Indonesia, you're moving into a situation where it could be hot, it could be wet, it could be, absolute the sweat Olympics, as we used to call it when we get to Sepang normally. Sepang is one of the hottest and wettest. But there are some of us that really get on in that environment and some of us who don't. I was always very lucky. I've always enjoyed 35-degree heat and the like, rather than it being cold. Motorbikes don't like it, and the power gets knocked off and so on and so forth, and you've got other things to compensate for. But from a riding point of view, it's when you start to see some of these riders that are used to these kind of environments. I think, was it Bradley Smith? I remember talking to Bradley Smith, I think it might have been Sepang years ago. British racer, Bradley Smith. Anybody remember Brad as another very intelligent rider? But he used to spend time in a hot room. He used to spend time with the to try and get used to, operating at a higher physical level in a hotter room, if I remember correctly. And that is what it's like. I mean, you imagine you are doing like hundreds of press ups each race in 35 degrees in a helmet, in leathers, and with a tremendous amount of heat that's coming up from motorcycles both in front of you and underneath you. You're absolutely cooking from the inside out. And it's a very, very physical thing, racing a motorcycle. You're spending virtually no time at all sat in the seat. Just about everywhere, especially on a MotoGP bike, because a straight is not really a straight on a MotoGP bike because you're having to control so many things. And fatigue is something that affects performance. Nowadays they're all athletes. Again, if you look back over the years, the guys that came through towards the end of a tough year were generally those that were a bloody sight fitter and had worked out their physiques accordingly. Well, now they're all like it. I mean, we used to talk about Mick Doohan. He was a machine. If you talk about the 1980s, there was nobody that was fitter than Mick Doohan. He used to run up and down that hill at the back of Monaco where he lived at the time and blow everybody away. Our own, I say our own, Northern Ireland's Jeremy McWilliams. I mean, Jeremy McWilliams, he's 60-something and he's still, there is not a millimetre of fat on that bloke. He's like the table my computer's on, it's like rock hard he is. And he's still got the mentality to perform in the way he does. So those that are mentally and physically able will prevail in places like Indonesia, Thailand, which is going to be warm as well. Sepang, obviously. And then we end up in bloody freezing cold Valencia later on in the year, which it's never a favourite of mine. I won't go off on that rant just yet. We're a podcast or two in advance of me ranting about Valencia.
We've got a while to go. What is it? Still 6 races? 6 races, I think, in 8 weeks. So there's still plenty of time for you to get your Valencia rants in. But in terms of the championship, we've picked the bones a lot out of the fact that it looks as though right now Jorge Martin is the man, not only up front in the championship, perhaps also just with that slight mental edge as well. Pecco Bagnaia, what does he need to do, Keith?
Stay on, I think, is the is the crux of that one. I mean, I think looking at his no score rate, which is bloody important. He's had 4 sprint wins and 7 Grand Prix wins. That's what has really kept him in the go. He's had the wins of the major points, whereas Jorge Martin's had 5 sprint wins and only 2 Grand Prix wins, and he's still leading it by 24 points now. This is going to be, I would think Jorge Martin is quite proud of himself this weekend. Okay, Bastianini bashed him out of the way, but he dealt with it really professionally. He had the pace. He perhaps gave away too many track limits warnings too early on in the race, which basically disallowed him from trying hard when it all got a bit squirrely later on in the race, because you cannot, to be given a long lap penalty, would have killed his race. So he was under pressure in Misano to not break a track limits warning again. Otherwise, I think Bastianini might not have had the opportunity to be where he was so close towards the end of the race. So I think Jorge Martin could be quite proud of himself with how he handled things this weekend. It could be better. It's always good when you can see just a bit of room for improvement, and you can be fairly sure he'll be working on that improvement. But then when you go to somewhere like Lombok, I can't predict this, and I know you're going to ask me in a minute to predict what's happening in Lombok. And
no,
this
on Thursday. We're on Monday.
Oh, yeah, okay.
You guys are coming back on Thursday.
Well, I'll have a little bit of a think about it then.
All right.
But I don't know Lombok. I don't know Lombok well enough to, it's only, I've never been to Lombok. I'll readily admit that. It came online after I finished traveling.
Same.
So it's kind of a difficult one for me. But it will depend on the weather.
Yeah.
Everything. I mean, this whole last weekend, we had great racing this weekend. I mean, Pirellis are working so well on Moto3 and Moto2. We should say that. Michelin, we should also say, seemingly shelved that brand new front tyre that everybody was saying was quite good. Don't understand that myself. I mean, Michelin's development, and again, it costs a lot of money to develop anything. And I mean, Michelin have developed a new front tyre that it doesn't look like they're going to run anymore. Maybe that's because when we get a bit further down the road, they're going to be developing even more tyres for this new set of rules in 2027. But I still think that if you've got a tyre that's an upgrade, it should be out there. It should be given to them. So I don't quite understand that, because I think the majority of the paddock quite like that new Michelin front tyre, but for some reason it's not happening. We'll be watching that space as we move forward.
Well, moving forward, Keith and Renisa will be back on Thursday for your Indonesian Grand Prix preview. But that is it for our Emilia Romagna Grand Prix chat. Finally, I managed to get that one out. Perfect.
How many goes did we have at that before we came on here?
A few. I was fine last week, and then it just, on Thursday, and it just all went away from me today. Anywho, do remember to hit the subscribe button wherever you are listening to this podcast too. It really does help. And feel free to leave us a comment. Take a look at the links below for our Patreon and YouTube memberships. And like I said, Keith and Renita will be back on Thursday.
Yeah, don't be scared of the Patreon stuff. I mean, whenever anybody says Patreon, join or subscribe, you all go, I'm not going to do that. It's like a force field against subscribing. Subscribing makes a big difference for us, because it moves us up the rankings, if you like, and that's good from where it gets placed. So we really, really would appreciate anybody that's not subscribed. Just press the subscribe button.
Yeah.
If you don't like us, then obviously you can cross it out a bit later on, but I mean, it would really, really help from our position and trying to move things on. But the Patreon thing, don't be scared of having a look at that either. I mean, it's going to, we've got quite a few good ideas coming up in the next few months as well that you guys can join in on. But take a look at it anyway. Don't sort of be put off by subscriptions or Patreons or any of that stuff.
And you can always send us an email at omgmotogp@gmail.com and we'll be sure to take a look at those. But from myself and Keith, for now, it's goodbye.